He might have missed a game, but New Orleans Saints Chris Olave is still the NFL's best rookie wide receiver through 7 weeks, and why you shouldn't be sleeping on tight end Juwan Johnson. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today, Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode, can the New Orleans Saints add some depth to their defensive interior before the trade deadline? We'll discuss some names to watch in the trade market, where the New Orleans Saints run defensive struggles have been at their absolute worst. But first, we're going to take a look at some bright spots over on the New Orleans Saints offense. Rookie wide receiver Chris Olave and third year, kind of second year tight end, right? Remember, he changed positions at one point, Juwan Johnson. Now, 3 interceptions, bad run defense, a loss. It all could not stop rookie wide receiver Chris Olave and tight end Juwan Johnson from shining Thursday night. Juwan Johnson, of course, caught 2 touchdowns, his first 2 touchdowns of the season. Chris Olave did not find the end zone, but he found over 100 receiving yards yet again in this New Orleans Saints offense. Chris Olave right now has missed the game, didn't really touch the ball, see the ball very much the first half of the Atlanta Falcons game week 1, and he still leads the NFL right now amongst rookie wide receivers in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. He's got 2 receiving touchdowns, which makes him second in that count right now, putting him only behind Jahan Dotson, who's got 4. The other thing that's been really interesting to watch about Chris Olave so far this season, too, has been his yards after catch. Right now, he's got 84 yards after catch. There's only 3 totals that are ahead of him in that category. Romeo Doubs with 140. 140. Garrett Wilson with 109, the former teammate of Chris Olave at the Ohio State Buckeyes, and then Drake London at 104, only 20 yards ahead of Chris Olave. And remember, Olave, the big knock on him was that he's a yards before catch threat, not necessarily yards after catch threat, but you're seeing him put those yards up. Now, on a per reception basis, only 2.6 yards after catch per reception. But that's because he got so many of them things. He's got 32 receptions already so far on the season. Second place behind him is former teammate Garrett Wilson with 28 over with the New York Jets. So Chris Olave, again, having a fantastic season, and he's doing it by creating separation as well. This is not a tune that has changed when it comes to Chris Olave. In fact, last week when Chris Olave was out against the Cincinnati Bengals, the player that led in yards of separation per target was Juwan Johnson with 2.15 yards. Second place behind him was Marquez Callaway at just 1.98 yards. This week against the Arizona Cardinals, the Saints get Chris Olave back. He ends up being in second place again behind Juwan Johnson, who we're going to speak about here in just a moment. But Olave coming in at 3.12. So pretty sizable difference, over a yard addition when it comes to separation. In fact, Chris Olave is so good at creating separation. There was one play against the Arizona Cardinals where he created separation twice on the same play. He ended up running an in route that wide open space over the middle of the field, ended up, faking out his defender there and creating a ton of separation off of that. Andy Dalton, though, had to roll to the opposite side because of the pressure coming from the left side. So what did Chris Olave do? One of the veteran things that he does well, which is track alongside the scramble drill, making sure that he's making himself available to the quarterback that's in trouble. He ends up changing direction, juking out that same defender and creating separation a second time, heading back toward the sideline. converting the first down on that reception. So that's Chris Olave. Juwan Johnson, though, should not be slept on. The New Orleans Saints were without Adam Troutman going into this game. Nick Van Nett hasn't really had a lot of opportunities this season, has been inactive a lot, things like that. Taysom Hill was kind of, is serving sort of that multiple role. He's not just the tight end. He's also a running back. He's also a quarterback. He's also a wide receiver. We saw him score his touchdown out wide on a screen pass to him, all that. But Juwan Johnson, he's your true tight end right now, and he's doing fantastic in that role. Right now, Juwan Johnson has the 2 touchdowns that he scored against the Arizona Cardinals as his season total, but I do not believe that it stops there. I think that Juwan Johnson should continue to get more opportunities and more targets in the passing game. Just looking at some numbers here when it comes to Johnson, he actually led the way in separation, yards of separation per target again this week at 3.83, nearly 4 yards of separation. And he was being guarded in some cases by Byron Murphy, for instance. So it's not like he's just, making this happen against, errant defensive linemen that are dropped into coverage in a weird system, or, linebackers that are really more so pass rushers that aren't coverage. Because, this is Isaiah Simmons. This is big for a guy like Juwan Johnson. 5 catches on 5 targets, so 100% reception rate there. 32 receiving yards, and he had the 2 touchdowns. The first touchdown was a catch and run. He was able to get away from Myjai Sanders. The Saints, with a nice play design, pretty much near the red zone here. You've got Marquez Callaway on the outside. You've got Juwan Johnson on the same side of the field, lined up in line. The two basically cross one another on that right half of the field. Marquez Callaway pulls some of the defense over to the center of the field. You hit Juwan Johnson on the outside in stride. He's able to turn it upfield, evade Myjai Sanders for the who was trying to make the tackle, and then you end up walking into the end zone. Nice touchdown there for him. But then the really impressive touchdown was one on the opposite side of the field where the Saints effectively ran. We'll call it a rub route because the Saints were on offense. If you're on defense, you call it a pick. But, it was a rub route, so they end up running and sort of creating some of that traffic jam again with Marquez Callaway, big receiver, right? He allows you to do things like that. And then Juwan Johnson gets over to the outside. He's not necessarily open, but it was a really well-placed pass by Andy Dalton, and then a really, really nice catch, a beautiful catch by Juwan Johnson to lay out and catch that one off of his, not really off of his back shoulder, really off of his back hip, right? Got to put that low and outside so that the defender can't get to it, give your receiver a chance, and Juwan Johnson, a catch radius, absolutely gives you a chance. So very nice to see Chris Olave continue to shine under the lights. He has been above expectation, despite expectations being so high. And then, of course, Juwan Johnson, who was kind of one of those sleeper / breakout guys that you were watching over the course of the offseason. He so far has shown you that he can bring that to your team as well. So 2 great highlights for the New Orleans Saints over on the offensive side, who are getting a little better moving the ball through the air. If they can get some of their healthy players back, Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry, for instance, that potentially has a huge impact for what they're able to do toward the back end of the season through the air. We'll break that down in tomorrow's episode for our Film Watch Wednesday. Coming up next, though, we're going to dive into the weakest point when it comes to the Saints' run defense. Where is it? We'll break it all down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Now, a word from our sponsor over at BetterHelp. Sometimes in life, it can be really, really hard to stay solution-oriented. Problem-solving mode is something people are constantly in the search for because you get kind of stuck in this cycle of thinking about what's wrong and you don't necessarily find solutions. So when you learn how to find your own solution, there's really no better feeling. And a therapist can help you get to that place where you become a better problem solver, making it easier for you to be able to accomplish your goals, no matter how big or small, and no matter what gets in your way. I'm someone that does therapy. I use BetterHelp as well. Absolutely love it because it makes everything really nice and kind of convenient, right? I can set up an appointment online. I can do it through video chat. I could do it through phone call, or I can even do it just in chat when I just really need to talk to somebody, or if I don't feel like showing my face and stuff like that. We all have those days. So really, really good stuff over at BetterHelp to make sure that you're maximizing your ability to be able to do what you need to do to remain well, particularly on the mental side of things. So if you think about giving therapy a shot, BetterHelp is really a fantastic option, if not the best option that's out there. It's easy, it's accessible, it's affordable, and it's entirely online. So you can do it from the comfort of your own home or wherever you are. So when you want to become a better problem solver, therapy can help you get there. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON, so you can get 10% off of your first month. That's betterhelp.com/lockedon. And speaking of great online resources, make sure you're also checking out LinkedIn. Whether you're looking for a job or whether you're a small business looking to hire, LinkedIn Jobs is the place to be. But I'm going to speak to those of you that are looking to hire right now, because if you want to get to the candidates that you want to talk to faster, LinkedIn Jobs is the way to get that done. You want to be 100% certain that you have the best and most qualified candidates available, and LinkedIn makes sure that they're putting the right people in front of you faster and for free. All you have to do is post your job up. They're going to give you a bunch of different simple tools like screening questions to make sure you focus on the candidates that have the requisite experience and skills that you're looking for. You can also put the purple hashtag hiring frame on your LinkedIn profile to help spread the word that you are hiring, help to draw some more eyes to that application. So this is one of the reasons why small businesses vote LinkedIn Jobs #1 when it comes to delivering quality hires versus the leading candidates. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the quality candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints run defense hasn't been so far this season what it used to be. And in particular, it's the defensive left side that has been its weakest link so far. We appreciate you so much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast so you can get all of the fantastic news around the wild world of sports in around 22 minutes or so. Don't miss a beat. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube as well. New Orleans Saints run defense has been a big story so far this season. This is a defense that we would usually talk about being 20 games into a streak of not allowing a 100-yard rusher and all of that. And the Saints were just 8 yards away from giving up their third this season. They already gave that up to Cordarelle Patterson and Christian McCaffrey in weeks 1 and 3. Week 7, Eno Benjamin, the Arizona Cardinals' third-string running back, had 92 rushing yards against the New Orleans Saints. And there's a specific spot that they continuously targeted to be able to get that. So we'll break that down to get us started. Out of Eno Benjamin's 92 rushing yards, 61, according to NFL Next Gen Stats, were gained by running behind or in between the center and right guard on their offense. So running at the New Orleans Saints left side of the line. You add 11 yards on 3 attempts around the right edge of the offensive line. That means 71 of Eno Benjamin's 92 rushing yards came from rushing at the left side of the New Orleans Saints defensive line. And if you're thinking, oh, well, yeah, okay, well, that happened in that game. So, things like that, they happen that way. But it's not just that team, right? It's not just Eno Benjamin. A third of Joe Mixon's rushing yards from the Cincinnati Bengals came by running between the center and the right guard. Almost half, actually almost 2/3 now that I look at it, to the right side. Looking then at the week 5 game up against the Seattle Seahawks, 71 yards comes from Kenneth Walker's 88 comes from running around the right tackle. So again, targeting the New Orleans Saints left side. If you look at the week 3 game against the Carolina Panthers, Christian McCaffrey, 30 yards from running in between the center and right guard, another 12 yards by running around the right end, another 10 yards by running on either side of the right tackle. So again, over a third of those yards coming from running over at the left side. It doesn't stop there. Let's go to week 1 up against the Atlanta Falcons. Cordarelle Patterson, 40 yards by running around the right tackle, 26 additional yards by running around the right tight end over on that side. So that's 66 yards out of his 120, over half of his yards coming from just rushing to those 2 spots, to the end of the New Orleans Saints defensive line on the opposite side. And even in games where there wasn't a lot of rushing success against the New Orleans Saints, Dalvin Cook only had 76 rushing yards, but he had 55 of them by running either on the outside of his right tackle or the outside of the tight end lined up in line on the right side. So again, a huge portion of the rushing yards coming from attacking the New Orleans Saints left side of the defensive line. And here's what's tricky about that, because here I am pointing out a problem, but Ross, what's the solution? The solution is fundamentals, right? Got to get better, got to play better. I mean, you saw Cam Jordan had an average depth of tackle in last week's game in the run game of -1 yard. So 1 yard behind the line of scrimmage. Pete Werner, minus 1.5 yards. The issue was that David Onyemata's was 6 yards downfield, right? You had other players who's were off the defensive line that were 3 yards downfield. Those types of things where you're resetting the offensive line and you're allowing yards before contact, yards before even crossing the new line of scrimmage, that ends up biting you in the butt. That's what we saw against the Atlanta Falcons, for instance. Before Cordarelle Patterson was even breaking the offensive line, he was already 2 yards downfield because that's how far the offensive line had pushed the New Orleans Saints defensive line. We saw that again last week up against the Arizona Cardinals, who ran for 4.7 yards per attempt on the New Orleans Saints. This is a defense that usually tries to hold teams and celebrates holding teams to 3 yards per attempt, 1.7 yards beyond that. And it doesn't help when you're averaging like 7.7 yards here, 15 yards here, 13 yards here, all of that. That doesn't help because you're giving up these big breakaway runs like the big 41, 45 yarder that we saw Eno Benjamin pull off. So for New Orleans, the struggle in terms of fixing this is that you can't really just identify one player or a pair of players and say, okay, these players aren't playing up to speed when it comes to the run game, because the Saints change so much of what they do over on the defensive line consistently. So really, you've got Cam Jordan, you've got Shai Tuttle, you've got Malcolm Roach, you've got Tano Passanio, Marcus Davenport, David Onyemata. All of those guys are playing at some point on the left side of the defensive line because of how the New Orleans Saints rotate, shift, change, and sub out players on their D-line. So it's not as simple to just look at it and say, okay, let's get these couple of players up, let's get them producing a little bit better, and then the Saints will be in a better situation when it comes to run defense, because unfortunately, that's just not how this is going to work within their scheme. So they have to bolster their run defense and their attack over on the defensive line as a unit, as opposed to just individually singling out, okay, we got to step this part of the game up. So where can the New Orleans Saints do that? Well, one thing that they're going to be able to do big time is be able to rely on their key players, right? You got to be able to rely on guys like Cam Jordan, who we just mentioned, as well as a guy like Tano Passanio, who had three run stops according to Pro Football Focus in this game on his 3 tackles. Now, he did have a missed tackle, but didn't seem like that ended up being a big deal. But he had an average depth of tackle of -1 yard. So he was making his average tackle 1 yard behind the line of scrimmage, making plays in the backfield. Saw it from Cam Jordan, saw it from Pete Werner, and then no one else. Demario Davis had his average depth of target on the line of scrimmage, 0 yards downfield. That's still very good as well. He had 1 run stop. But when you have a guy like Tano Passanio who's making a 37.5% stop percentage, meaning that 37.5, he accounted for 37.5 of the Saints stops on the defensive side in the run game and things like that. That's not great, right? You want to see these guys kind of sharing the wealth a little bit, everyone making those plays. So I think that's where it actually is of benefit that the Saints have to bolster play across the defensive line as a unit versus just being able to focus down on 1 or 2 players that need to be able to step their game up, quote unquote. So I think that actually works in their favor because you want these guys sharing the wealth and sharing the responsibility along the defensive line. Now, they could get it done, but it doesn't mean that they have to get it done with this specific unit. The NFL trade deadline right around the corner, November 1st. Could they potentially bring in some faces to help on that defensive line? We thought that the New Orleans Saints would address their defensive interior over the offseason. They didn't do a ton there. They brought in a couple of guys, Juwan Johnson, who's no longer with the team. And then, of course, they brought in Kentavious Street, who was one of those guys that I really like, but again, is a part of the unit that hasn't been able to be successful in the run game the way that we're accustomed to seeing New Orleans be successful in the run game so far this season. So could they potentially bring in some help? They could go to the trade market. They could also go to free agency, and it could be a familiar face that comes back to them as well. So who should the Saints pursue to help shore up their defensive interior before the trade deadline? I've got some names for you as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to that, I get to tell you about our good friends over at Prize Picks. Now, this is my favorite way to play daily fantasy that I've ever been able to enjoy. This is really cool. It's super simple. You pick a game, you pick some players, stuff like that, 2 to 5 players, and then you project whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their prize picks projection. So you can go more on Alvin Kamara at 68.5 rushing yards. If he gets 69 rushing yards, bang, you hit there. You could look at golf and you can take somebody to go more or less than 1.5 birdies on their round. That's a really cool way to play as well. There's so many different ways to do this as well, right? It's not just the NFL, as I'm showing you. It's also golf. They will probably have pickleball eventually. It's the MLB with the World Series getting started, more or less in terms of strikeouts or just strikeouts thrown, in terms of home runs, all this other stuff. So really, really cool stuff for you to check out over at Prize Picks today. So let me tell you how to do it. All you have to do is head over to the Prize Picks app or head over to prizepicks.com. Use the promo code Locked On. That's going to make you eligible for a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100, meaning that if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. You deposit $50, they'll give you $50 as well. All you have to do is use the promo code Locked On. Don't forget, Locked On is a promo code that you want at sign up for your instant deposit match of up to $100, the Prize Picks app or at prizepicks.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Believe it or not, the New Orleans Saints could turn to a familiar face to help with their defensive interior woes. Now, we just spoke about the New Orleans Saints and their struggles in the run game, but now we're just looking at the defensive interior as a whole that could also maybe use a little bit of help, right? And that could be help in the run game as well as help in pass rush. But let's start off with somebody that the Saints could turn to that they know very well, that could come in and immediately have a likely positive impact on their run defense so far this season. And it's free agent defensive tackle, Malcolm Brown. Now, trade deadline's on the way. I understand trade talk is a sexy thing, but before we get to the trade talk, this is a guy that the New Orleans Saints already know, that already knows their system, that I'm surprised hasn't already been brought in for a tryout. So I assume there's a reason for that. So whether he was moved on from and his previous situation because of health or maybe because of conditioning or maybe because of skill or whatever, right? There might be a little bit of a drop off in terms of his age, things like that. Those things happen in the NFL. But you going to get any worse? You know what I mean? Like, is he going to make your defense worse? I don't think so, right? And I think that the New Orleans Saints, who are a team that has been trying to replace Malcolm Brown since they traded Malcolm Brown to Jacksonville Jaguars, would benefit from bringing Malcolm Brown back. He's an easy retention guy. He's somebody you can bring in. Contract's non-guaranteed. Not going to cost you a ton of money to get it done. Anything like that. He's just somebody that, I mean, you could even sign him on to the practice squad and then elevate him a couple of times if you want to. Like, there are a couple of different ways that the Saints can go about this. So Malcolm Brown is a name I'm already genuinely surprised the Saints haven't looked into, but based upon where they are right now in terms of like what their run defense has looked like, how porous they've been in that area of the game, where they're ranking right now in terms of their run defense, in terms of yards given up, which right now in the run game is 22nd in the NFL, which is vastly different than what we're used to, giving up an average of 4.6 yards per carry. I could see bringing in a guy that could be a stopgap, a stop plug for you, like Malcolm Brown, bringing him back to a system that he's familiar with could immediately have a positive impact. Let's say that the Saints don't want to do that, though. Maybe there's something else going on with Malcolm Brown. Maybe the drop off is too much, whatever it is. And so they want to go with somebody that's younger, that kind of fits the same mold, that they could potentially kind of groom into what it is that they need. Over at USA Today, one of the big pieces that's rolling around right now is one player that every team could trade before the deadline. There was an interesting name, someone that I like a lot coming out of the Michigan State Spartans just a year ago, second year, defensive tackle Naquan Jones from the Tennessee Titans. Now, he just came into the NFL last year. He came in as an undrafted free agent, however. So the idea of moving on from him isn't like you have for the Tennessee Titans, isn't like you're in a situation where you invested a first round draft pick or something like that, and therefore you're married to the guy and you can't move on from him, right? And to be honest, you look at last year and his first year, his rookie year, he had a great season with them. He had 9 pressures. Remember, we're talking about a defensive interior guy here. So he had 9 pressures, 4 of which were sacks. That's a really nice conversion rate. But he also had 18 stops in the run game. and had an pretty good sort of season when it came to the run game. But we also know that that's something that takes a little bit of time to catch on. So if you look at his Pro Football Focus grades and stuff like that, you kind of see like up and down in terms of run defense, but we're not married to that, right? But he had the 14.3% stop percentage in terms of what it is that he did in turning around his tackles for big plays in the run game. You look at this season, however, 22 snaps on defense in week 1, 18 in week, that was in week 2, 18 in week 3, 15 in week 4, 3 in week 5, only 1 in week 7. His snaps are coming down, and that's because some of these other guys on the team have begun to really step into those roles. And so because of that, that's kind of pushed him out. A guy like Tier Tart, for instance. So now he's just kind of sitting back. So could the New Orleans Saints potentially offer enough, which shouldn't be a lot, a day 3 pick or something like that, to bring a guy like Juwan Jones in? I think that would be worth the at least the phone call, right? That would be worth the phone call, in my opinion. One other guy that I really like, and you might have gotten a good look at him this past Sunday, with the Saints not having a game. And if you've been around for a while, you know that this is somebody that I really, really liked in 2019, and it was Jerry Tillery. He's now with the Los Angeles Chargers, was originally with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. He was somebody that, like, people asked a lot of questions about him because he liked to write poetry and he liked to go on trips and things like that. So they were like, oh, is he really into football? Clearly the guy's into football. Here he is now 3 years later. The thing about it is that he's flashed a lot in terms of being a pass rusher, but he's not the most stout run defender. So do you feel like he has the tool set that you can craft into a run defender? Or also, do you feel like you can get your unit that you currently have in-house operating better in the run game? And so adding the pass rusher on the interior could be the next step on top of that, because the Saints haven't really gotten a lot of pass rush presence from their defensive interior. I talked about David Onyemata being one of the most important players in the game last week. He got a sack, but what happened? He got called back because of a pass interference penalty or illegal hands to the face or whatever it is that referees are calling these days. And then that drive ended up turning into a touchdown. And that was on a 3rd down. So when you can kind of bolster a little bit your pass rush on the interior, that ends up impacting your pass defense as well in terms of the secondary and all of that. So could his pass rushing and sort of versatility be able to move him around the defensive line? Could that be something that the Saints value? Those are things that they usually value, but how much do you value in terms of going out to the trade market there? And again, when it comes to trading for defensive interior players, you don't have to give up a lot of capital for that. We see some of the big name defensive tackles move for 6th, 7th round selections. If the Saints can get away with moving a 5th, 6th, or 7th rounder to bring in a guy that can have an immediate impact for them this season as they look to turn things around, knowing you can recoup that pick at a later time if you wanted to, especially with the potential Sean Payton trade on the way, I think you're in a pretty good place there. Or if you have another player that you could potentially put up for a trade, that could be a way to go as well. So those are some names that could potentially come in and help bolster the New Orleans Saints defensive interior. If you have some names of your own, make sure you send them over to me at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. And of course, you can also leave them below if you're watching on YouTube as a comment as well. I appreciate y'all, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day today. How will the New Orleans Saints be impacted with the returns of Michael Thomas and or Jarvis Landry? We'll break down the film in tomorrow's episode. But until then, make sure that you make today's second listen Locked On Sports Today, so you can make sure you're getting all the biggest stories of the day every day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and of course the take of the day as well, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Appreciate y'all, as always, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi, and if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola. Hit me up, let me know how the family's doing, let me know how you living, let me know how you momming them, and trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.